We'll introduce you to our owl, which is sitting here in the middle, helping us be recorded as well as to hear all of us more clearly, we hope. And this also allows us to put the video on the website. Yeah, Charlie and Bill, you get to sit right up here front. Already, why not? Because you're close to the front of the program.
Okay.
So good afternoon and welcome to the October 27th, 2021 meeting of the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority for Harrisburg. Our City of Harrisburg ex officio member Dan Conley is unable to join us today. And while you see Mark Woolley on the agenda, we received a call at 2 from the mayor's assistant letting us know that Mark is feeling under the weather and will be unable to join us. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes, which I hope everyone's had a chance to review. I'd like to ask for a combined motion to approve the August 25th and September 27th minutes. Can I have one motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion?
There was a correction that was pointed actually by Mark Ryan, and
Okay.
so the ones you're approving are actually the corrected.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, Mark's not here.
He's coming. He's
He's coming.
en route. He will
En
be,
route,
he will
okay.
be here shortly.
So we'll need to get him, if we can get a
I'll
chair.
figure it out.
Great. All right, so that's it for discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. I have no report for this month, except to say I am really, really glad that we are on the final approach to next Tuesday's election. Harrisburg deserves to know its future and to move forward with energy and determination to serve its citizens in the best manner possible. So see, Charlie, that's how fast you get to the front of the agenda.
Wow. It's better to
And so-
city council meeting all the time, every day.
So we're delighted that Charlie DeBrunner, the controller, and Bill Lineberger, the assistant controller, are able to join us this afternoon to give their perspective on how the city's FY21 finances are looking. I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, I continue to be relatively optimistic about the city's finances. I still kind of can't figure out, even though we are getting a little more detail from Dan Connolly once in a while, we don't have enough to really understand why we're apart, but we have, we're real close on revenue, aren't we? Yeah, and we're just having some expense issues. And then one of the things Dan didn't tell us when we were doing our expenses was that he was including in his projections the amount of money necessary to effectuate the AMBAC and deal and also pay off the stadium. When we look at that, okay, that's a big number. It's $10 million. That's a discrepancy. But we have it. We just didn't put it in there because we were trying to look at it, what we had available to do such a deal. So we're a little bit closer on what the fund balance is going to be, but we still think we're going to be a lot higher than they. And as we get closer to December 31st, it's a little less conjecture and a little bit more reality. We did check the balance, the fund balance recently. We have the ability to reach in before the end of the month and see what kind of cash we have, and we figure out what our expenses are. So an additional $1 million coming in October. At any rate, what we are looking right now is our projection for the end of the year is a $74 million expenditure, $66 million in general fund revenues, prior year balance of $32 million, and we end up the year with $24 million. But that, keeping in mind that $10 million has already been paid for the AMBAC deal. So I thought it'd be useful for you to see where we were on the AMBAC liability at the same time. We start the year or at the 12th of November, we owe $5 million, and at the beginning of the year, we had 19. So it was a pretty nice whack. For 9 million, we got $3 or $4 million more because of the way the deal was structured. So here we are we believe that, and this is a low estimate, although when I'm checking around, it doesn't seem like anybody's doing anything to try and draw down the COVID funds for the expenses that are eligible. They're not trying to get that money, which if they did get that money, would put us in a better position to pay some of this debt down a little quicker.
And
My understanding is they're trying to hold off on taking that money because of the plans that the mayor has for them, which, yeah, he can't just do that. He has to wait for city council, so.
And just to clarify, you're talking about the funds that the city would be able to reimburse themselves for
Yes,
relative to that pot. And
yes.
what did you estimate that to be?
We're thinking, ballpark $5 million. So there you'd have $29 million at the end of 2029 and a $19 million liability. The other thing is that continues to amaze me is that they can't seem to think about how to do this incrementally. If we don't do it all at once, then we've got to go through a refi. That just doesn't make sense. If we owe $19 million and we decide to pay 10, it's a lot of money. It saves us a lot of money, even at our new rate of 5%. And then if you want to pay another 10 in 23 or 23, and you're out of it, it doesn't really grant you much. When we first started here, the idea that we have a cash balance at the end of the year and our debt down to $19 million is just preposterous. That we have $24 million left. It's preposterous. We started that first year unknown because of the way the accounting got done, and it was a little weird. After 2014, we really didn't know how much money we had. We thought we had about $4 million. I think we subsequently got out of it that we did have $4 million. And we've had a positive cash balance every year since. And that's one of the things that, we've been trying to point out is that without a competing use of this money, it just seemed useful to pay that debt down. But I never went back. So there we are. And I refer you to Dan and I, the letter Dan and I wrote last week. If you saw it, basically has the numbers in there of what these things will work. So I think we're in pretty good shape getting through the year. And I don't know what else to say except that I'm waiting for the end of the year to get some reality therapy. And of course, the 2022 is going to be our heaviest debt year left. We have an $8 million debt service payment due next year, and then it's gone. One of the things we were trying to impress, Bill and I met with the mayor 6 years ago and said, what it would really be great is if your legacy was coming out of 2021 with no debt. And it was doable. And then when you get in 2022, when the GO bonds go away, it's going to be spectacular. But now, coupled with the tax increases, that's a $20 million swing between now and 2023. And so now it's going to be, we got to do a much better job of managing money because there's going to be a lot of it. And we need to do a better job of keeping track of it. We need to do a better job of figuring out how to spend money. We haven't had a real budget in 8 years. They've all been fictitious. They're $80 million budgets and they spend $65 million. Now this year is a little bit different because of that extra 10 at the end. We've never, ever spent the budgets. And go down, starting in January, it goes down to go for a reallocation, which has never been a reallocation. It is a tap of prior year fund balance. Every time it goes down there, the prior year fund balance, these budgets become gigantic, and then they're not meaningful. We have never even gotten close to rejecting a purchase order in my office because of insufficient budget, because it's just so much. So I'm saying that when that kind of thing really should stop. They should try to do a better job of estimating revenue, estimating expenditures, there's no reason you should be fooling with a budget. You know this, Jerry. You should be October at the earliest is when you should be going back and going, I have to make some adjustments. And I would have suggested we do some real reallocations too, not just hitting the fund balance, but are there places where you haven't spent much money? You know, we're just not getting that level of management in our finance office. So what the future looks like, it looks really good, but it also needs to get managed. There's too much money now. I mean, there wasn't enough money and now there's too much, in my opinion, and we need to be careful what we do with it. And we need to be careful keeping track of it. Now, I never worry too much about nefarious activities at the city because there wasn't enough money. We would know. Well, how come we don't have any money in the general fund? Well, there's somebody took about $4 million. Oh, well, let's go find out what that is. If we have these big cash balances, it's not going to be quite as obvious. So we just have to do better keeping track of the finances. I guess that's my report. Did you want anything else?
Well, I think you've alluded to one question that I had is whether or not you actually see the MBEC deal coming to conclude, you know, getting through the gate before December 31st.
Yeah, we signed the paperwork in my office today to get it moving, and I was the last signatory. And what did we say, November 12th? So, yes.
So that's great.
Yeah. You know, I don't want to be somebody who looks as a chronic complainer either. I think this deal is really good. I think I've said that before. I was really pleased that we have this deal, and so I'm glad we're paying it off. It's been a long time coming. How about it? So I guess do you have any other questions?
Just a couple of questions on clarifying on a couple of your numbers, Charlie. Regarding the fund balance projection that you're presenting, did you say that it includes under the $74 million in expenditures, the $10 million allowance for the AMBAC bid?
Yes.
Not included in there is your estimate, which is $5 million of eligible reimbursement from the Biden funds.
Yes.
And
then keep in mind that estimate is a WAG. I mean, it's an educated WAG, but it's still a WAG. Do you know what a WAG is?
Yeah.
Wild ass guess.
No,
But it's scientific WAG.
but the dog is moving the dog.
And then just one question about your estimates on fund balances, because sometimes we always see a little bit of an asterisk as to how encumbrances are accounted for and in the magnitude of the encumbrances. Do you have any comments or asterisks related to encumbrances with your projections?
We don't have any encumbrances. Bill's point to me, and I trust Bill, like I always thought we should include the encumbrances as a budget cut. Bill said if we include the encumbrances, we end up double counting because we'll actually pay them again in a subsequent month when the encumbrance is clear. So we're not putting them in any. So this is strictly cash.
I also get the feeling on the subject of encumbrances that they're not always real. That sometimes department heads might encumber the money so that it's accounted for with no idea whether it's actually going to be expended or not. It's a hold
That's
on
the
money.
truth. I mean, we have some open encumbrances that are open for a long time. And it's for stuff that they need to bid or need to get quotes on. And they need to have an option to go get the stuff quickly, but they might not need it, like auto parts, all kinds of inventory stuff like that we don't want to keep a big inventory, but we do want to allow the managers to have the opportunity to move quickly when they need these things. So that's why we have those open encumbrances. And I think we have been shutting those down now 2 or 3 months into the subsequent fiscal year, and they have to go back and do it. When we first got there, there were like outstanding encumbrances that were really old. And it's hard to keep track of stuff. I would say that the financial management system that we have works pretty well when everybody's putting the right number, putting the numbers. But you know, and they seem to be doing a fairly good job of that now. It's not quite the case when we first got there, but I feel pretty confident in our numbers now.
But follow-up question, in the expenditure estimate that you have, $74 million, is that your estimate, or is that a projection? Is that a projection based on your analysis, or is that based on the actual budget of the city?
We do, because of what I described about the budget, we don't use a budget for anything because it's just not working. We're using actuals and, a straight line projection, which is why we didn't have the 10 million in there. There was no way we could find out in a straight line projection. We'd have no way of knowing that that's what the plan was. So I was glad he finally got some detail, and we could see why he kept telling everybody our numbers were. Which, are they wrong, or do you have a difference of opinion? The word wrong, I thought, was improperly used. Still being improperly used in today's patriot. When you have a difference of opinion, it's not wrong, it's different. And I don't think it's fair to characterize this stuff as wrong, which is being characterized. So we're doing our own projections, and we update them every month. We don't do it we do it every month. We bring up the actuals, which is why it gets so much easier this time of year, because we're all the way at almost the end of October with actuals. So we've got 10 months of actuals. And also, if we go back and look at the history, which Bill has included here on these tables, the variation year over year is remarkably low. I mean, we pretty much do the same thing every year. So I think these projections are reasonable, and as I said at the city council meeting, even if they're not, we don't have to do anything. We're not told to do anything right away. So I don't think we need to do something January 1st. Why don't we wait and see what is real, say March, and if these things are coming in the way I think they're going to, then we can start writing some big checks. And another thing Dan got, which I thought was useful when he was negotiating with AMBEC, is we only were allowed to make one payment. We can make as many as we like. So we could, if you want to talk about prudence, which some people have more confidence in our projections than others. I'd be one of the most confident, but some people may not. That you could say, let's try and figure out if we're going to pay the debt down by $15 million next year. Let's do it. Make it easy, $12 million. Just do $4 million three times a year, and you still be allowed to do it. I mean, you really keep your cash, preserve your cash a bit. And then when we get into 2023, we can, whatever we have left, we can clean up that deal. We don't really need to go much further than that. Once we don't have to save up for we have a big, in March, we have a geo payment of $3 million. And in September, October, it's $5 million. And then we also have our pension payment in October and November. That will stay. But the other $8 million is going to go. So it's just getting through. It's not going to be hard to get through 2021. But getting through 2023 is the real issue. Is going to be what to do with that money. It's a pleasant issue as far as I'm concerned. So we have had to deal with that. So.
I was just going to add, actually, Dan's mid-year projections have us at 73.3. So you're coming in pretty close,
yeah,
probably closer than any other year,
yeah,
which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Which is it okay if anybody else wants to butt in and get a question? And I just have a couple more follow-up questions. And it has to do, it kind of relates to encumbrances again. And I think it also ties into the mid-year report that Dan Connolly did. And it has to do with the capital projects, which are big ticket items. So I suppose it would be the role of financial management to be able to provide, the amounts that are actually expended versus the amounts that are perhaps, I don't know if the term is encumbered in this situation. For example, by a large construction contract that perhaps might not be all expended, this season and then rolls over into next year. So those are big numbers that can obviously affect the available general fund balance. And then I suppose it also affects what the city does with its budget for next year. See if you agree with this. My understanding is that in the past, it's been quite typical that capital projects sometimes take longer than initially projected. So they actually roll over into the next year. So how is that treated with regard to fund balance, both for end of year as far as what's unrestricted and available, and how does that relate to the budget that we'll be seeing for next year?
You can jump in here too.
Well, this is all just general fund right here. So the stuff you're talking about will probably be in the capital projects fund. It should have its own funding source. Whether it's a transfer from the general fund or a bond issuance.
Well, what the thing is though, is that this capital projects fund right now is sort of, I don't know how things get in there. Do you? I mean, they look like capital, but you don't have a capital budget, which is really the issue. And I don't know that we've ever had one. They try to do one, but they don't seem to know what that means. And it is a plan, a multi-year plan with a notion of how much you want to spend on capital, not what you need and want. Because that's a budget decision. What do I have to spend on capital? And the wish list is always going to be larger than that. And that's where managers got to come in and say, well, this is what we're going to do next year. We got $60 million worth of capital projects and we got 20 to spend. That's what a capital budget is. But there's a time, it's time to, it's over time. It's not just a year. So, and that's really what you need to have, and you need to have a plan. And then you can see, how does this all fit together? And we're going to take $20 million this year and next year and next year and next year. And what do we get for it? That we don't have. On this capital project, it's sort of a project by project basis. At least that's the way it looks to me. Is that true to you? I don't see any plan.
There's a list.
Yeah. So when it comes to encumbrances for capital items, if you're getting to the end of the year, some of these things can be pretty complex. Now, we don't use general fund money to do road paving, but that would be a perfect example of something that's going to go from one year to the next. And you will have encumbrances, and you should roll those encumbrances forward and then roll the cash that's supporting that for, so that it's paid for in prior year funds. It's accounted for in prior year with encumbrances. That's how it should work in theory.
Yep, exactly. You should have the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, suggests a minimum of a 5-year plan that is updated at least once a year. And then the plan is the wish list, has things that you can do and things that you should do, but maybe you can't do. And then you should have your capital budget separate from your plan, and your budget should include the projects that you're actually undertaking. They should have their own work orders for each one, which is like an encumbrance. It has all the different facets, the money that's coming in from grants or from in the future from financing, because there will be loans in the future, and then the cash that has to go into that, and then all the different things that are associated with that one project together on one work order, whether it's things like architecture, engineering, legal costs, down to construction management, inspection. All of that's in that one project, and that project lives through a multi-year cycle once it's set up and funded. So things move from the plan to the budget when there's a funding to make them happen. So that's sort of the process of doing it. The way that the city of Harrisburg has done it is they have a pretty comprehensive list of the projects they're working on and where the funding is coming from, but things get added to the list as they become new ideas or new projects.
They're not budgeted.
They're
Not planned. They're just there. They never get budgeted. You should consider capital on a separate budget. The city council should be able to have some say in how this money is allocated among the projects that are suggested by the administration. This isn't this administration anyway doing it that way. So that there's consensus among the mayor and the city council about where we're going. Makes it life a lot easier that when you're doing it.
I think in fairness, we do have what we consider an approved capital improvement plan from the city. It's part of the submission they put together every year for their 5-year plan. And I think our impression of it is probably similar to your description of how it's composed, which is a list of projects that are, prioritized, and then the amount of funding that's required to complete them is estimated. And then so the project comes first, and as opposed to the amount of money that they want to spend coming in first, the way you describe it. And it seems to be related to the fact that the city has a lot of legacy issues, such as one of the big ones that's in the top of the list chronologically has to do with their ERP implementation and the management software that's used for everything from financial management to everything else. But I also think it's just been a constant a point that the ICA has always sought to stress, with the city and the folks there, that just strengthening of financial management is really important, given the amount of dollars, the complexity of the accounting issues that are being followed, and you'll see kind of reach a boiling point at a time when we're talking to you about your estimates and your projections for the year-end fund balance, and the impression that we get maybe taken away from those projections is that there's just a lot of question marks that are probably in the domain of financial management, as opposed to where they are now, just kind of in the range of maybe guesswork.
Well, I mean, we've been without a finance director for going on 2 years, and I think things are rolling along, but they're rolling along. Nobody aggressively managing this stuff. At least I can't see it. I don't know how it's getting done, frankly. I'm curious to see how this budget gets done. 2021 budget.
There's probably at a minimum a number of really competent, dedicated employees are probably putting in a lot of. We see emails Sunday, relatively late in the day from the accounting manager. So there seems to be some really competent and dedicated people in there who are helping keep things moving.
Yeah, I don't know. But Brian won't be working on that budget. I mean, he's got his hands full with the expense side. So I don't know we got any budget. I really don't know much about it. So I presume she's going to be doing that, but I just don't know. I don't know how to do it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Comments?
I just, if it's okay, Charlie, I made a point with Dan at the last meeting, and I'd just like to sort of make the point again, but do it in a question format. There had originally been some plan that there would be a refinancing of the balance of the debt at some point in the near future. Let's say sometime in 2022, the city, the current administration said, well, we're going to have a balance. We're going to go back into the debt marketplace, and we're going to try to not pay it off, but instead refinance it. And at that point, when that point was made, and I realize that's a decision that is subject to future change or alteration, I made the point that the city has the opportunity, based on the structure of the AMBAC deal, to make a pay down of the balance, even if whoever the administration is next year wants to refinance the balance. Before they do that, they can further pay down the principal on the outstanding debt from X to Y, and then just refinance Y. There's no requirement that they refinance the entire balance.
You're right. It doesn't have to be one or the other. On the other hand, one of the other benefits of this AMBAC proposal was that the interest rate is dropping down to 5%. And at least the initial stuff we got from Dan Connolly looked like he was shooting for 5 after refi. Now you add up the fees and the cost of doing the refi with the fact that you're not going to get any improvement in the interest rate. It hasn't ever made sense to me, and it even makes less sense to me now to refinance this. And I have 3 years at 5%, and I think I'm going to be sitting on a pile of cash. I saw this newspaper article or letter to the editor where they're concerned about cash. I'm just not. And we're working on it every day. But I'm just not. Are you? You guys not concerned about it. But it needs to be managed. You need to keep track of it. You need to look at it. Bill's getting in there once a week and we're going into the system and finding how much cash we have on a regular basis. And we also know what's outstanding. So I think we have a real good idea what kind of cash we are going to have. And so I just continually think, and oh, by the way, stand by the numbers that were in that letter to the editor. Those numbers came out of the 5-year plans, and they tie back to those plans to the penny. That amortization schedule that Bill put together, you can see very clearly how much interest we've been paying, $1.5 million a year in interest, and it's been almost $10 million that we paid in interest, while we sit here with a bank balance of $40 million. And I used to say to Eric, I said, you realize that you borrowed most of that money from AmBank that's sitting there. And so I really am trying very hard not to get down that refi path if I can help people see why we don't need to do it. I'm not infallible, but we've been working on this a long time, several years, and nothing has changed our minds about whether or not to do this refi.
Charlie, what kind of interest do you draw on the funds that are sitting there?
I'm sorry, Kathy.
What kind of funds do we draw on the funds that are sitting there? What kind of interest?
Nothing. You know, the city is
what are we
precluded
What are
from.
we paying on the interest?
We're
what are
paying
we-
five. We're paying 5.7. 6.7.
Existing debt.
6.75 is what we're paying. What we're earning on our cash balance
Yes.
is less than a point.
Okay, that's. what I was
And you know, we are
thinking. Thank you.
restricted. We are not allowed to take flyers with the public's money and say, well, let's see if we can improve our yield, like maybe
Yeah.
retirement. But so it's nothing. And so when you look at this and you say, what is a competing, and I would always say that to Eric and say, what other plans do you intend to dam? I can understand why we want to do this refi if we have competing purposes for this money. And we can use this money and have it cheaper to take it out of to take it out of our fund. But if we could borrow it at less than 5.65%, we should do that for these things. But there's never anything. There was never anything. And so when Dan Connolly was starting to talk about time value of money, part of that equation is what are you going to do with the money? And because if you're earning point nothing, it has no value. So anyway.
The, just to give you a sense, last week I sold a bond in another municipality and the interest, the APR average over the 20 years was 1.25%. Just to get you a sense of what you can, a municipality with a good credit rating can borrow money from in the marketplace right now. And on that subject, generally what municipalities do when they borrow money, and obviously borrowing money is just like in the corporate world, in the municipal world, borrowing money can make sense, but it's usually for investment in capital items that have a multi-generational benefit. So you're going to build a bridge or a sewer plant or whatever, and it's going to last 30, 40, 70 years. For 20 years, you finance it with debt because that is both a logical and a smart use of debt. So there is a place in municipal finance for debt. It's not that there's no role for smart debt in finance.
You're absolutely right. I mean, if you had a, as you say, a long-term project, a firehouse, it's going to last 35 years. You don't want to burden today's taxpayers with something that 35 years out should also be paying for. So you can spread it out by finance. So yeah, I am not a Luddite. I am not against debt. I'm against stupid debt. That's all.
So we've also sort of naturally transitioned into the next topic, and so I think we might want to move on. You're welcome to stay if you want. If you want to escape.
You know my position on me.
I do. There's a swoosh right behind you towards the door.
Paper blind following me.
Right.
I want to thank you guys for your service to the city while I'm here. I know you get about no thanks at all, which, and I just really appreciate you doing what you do.
So we thank you guys. So we've been there since our beginning. Thank you. You know your way out.
Better than I knew my way in.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you. So as I mentioned, Mark is not here, so I think if we want to take this time, just if there's anything anyone wants to discuss, specifically relative to the, I'm going to call it the undated letter from Mark, that I think was 10/18/21, if there, with all the highlights, if there were any issues we wanted to discuss, and then I might ask Jeffrey to follow up with Mark and or Dan to get answers to whatever we bring up. So I'll just open it up.
I'll
Yes, ma'am.
walk through that door for starters.
Okay.
As you know, I've been asking repeatedly about this OPEB trust being set up and appropriate people being appointed to it. I'm a management side labor and employment attorney. My real job is that. And I might sit at the bargaining table and argue with someone over benefit levels. But I am a firm believer that once you have agreed to benefit levels, that you must respect that contractual right. I don't understand why the people still have not been appointed to that trust and would ask that the appointees be established so that we can move on with this. I mean, this has been going on for at least months and months and months. And it shouldn't take that long to get the trustees. So I would ask once again that the city will get that, because that's, none of these things get any better with age. They only get older and smarter. Thank you.
On that point, do you have any perspective on the tagline at the end of the city response due to the law regarding liability of such board members? From the unpaid stock to the account? Your practice.
I don't have any particular experience with that, but that says to me one of a few things. Either you go out and try to get the people and come back and say, we've been refused by X people that we would like, or you get, and then you take that to the legislature and say, what are you going to help us do with this? This is a situation where we have a contractual obligation, but I don't think you assume that you're not going to get people until you've done a lot of due diligence and really, really try. And if anyone else has any insights, I'd certainly appreciate hearing those.
Whether at what cost, obviously, is the issue.
Yeah, I don't know if they're separate from the city organization, if they stand apart as a separate entity. The OPEB trust, the OPEB trust board, whether or not they are covered under the umbrella of the city's liability. If not, whether they can obtain their own protection for their officers, the way an authority, for example. Because
Just like we did.
well, we're a Commonwealth agency, but like a city authority
Yeah.
would establish their own protection from liability. I'm sure that must have been discussed. I have no doubt. But good, as I said, there's much more in this correspondence that beyond the OPEB trust.
So any other points? Yes, Ralph.
I want to bring up the second item that's provided by way of a response, which was regarding the collections and neighborhood services fund. And the response from Mark Woolley at the city seems to indicate that the city did not follow through on the initiative. And the initiative is included in the plan. And I'll note that we did ask multiple times, for several months in a row, in fact, for intel on the status of the implementation of these efforts to improve collections. And it's certainly disheartening to find out in October that they in fact didn't make any efforts. So I do think that that's an important topic for communications back to the folks at the city. I think there's a big disconnect there between what we feel is the importance of that as both as an initiative, but also due to the amount of money that's at stake. And we've seen that past due collections balance north of $12 million last update we got. And we again failed to receive an update on the amount that's outstanding, aging, anything to do with those balances. So I'm concerned about it. I think it might be an example of an area where management's attention isn't on it, and probably due to the fact that it's the north of potentially even higher than it was last that we saw. And due to the fact that the collections rate has not improved, that would imply that the actual balance has potentially increased as well. So I would note that, and I would note that it's a variation from the plan. I know there's implications about that. I asked Jeffrey, and I emailed Jeffrey prior to the meeting today to look it up, and I would love to bring that up and find out if it's the appropriate at this point to communicate to the city that we've identified and determined there's a variation from what's in the approved plan, and that we need the city to report on the actions that they plan to take to actually pick back up again and implement the initiative.
I would agree. Seems wholly appropriate. Because we're getting behind it. We're not getting any ahead.
I just wanted to point out that obviously, if there is a change in administration, but either way, you're going to be, before you know it, in the midst of the update to the 5-year financial plans. I mean, I know it's hard to believe, but time flies. And it will be April 30th, which is the day that's supposed to be submitted to us for review. And obviously, if there's a change in administration, there might be a change in a lot of objectives, including what to do with the neighborhood services fund going forward.
I mean, look, yeah, we can speculate about that, but if you'll recall earlier in the year, the plan was not balanced without an increase in collections. What do you recall the exact percentages in the 80s?
Yeah.
And
They're saying here, the city, I brought the plan.
Oh.
The city will build on its efforts to improve collection rates from 85% to 88% in 2022, which would result in at least $500,000 in additional annual revenue. And then it goes on to talk about by 2023, trying to have the overall collection rate increased to 93%, which would generate an additional $1.3 million.
thank you. So at the current rate of collections, that fund is on the trajectory to depletion. So that the efforts to make those collections they're important. So I mean, I can go on and elaborate on it. But we can speculate on what the plan is, but it seems that this plan was specifically crafted in order to make the neighborhood services fund solid.
I agree. The first sentence of the city response is unclear to me. Due to the pandemic, was it because of demand on city services or lack of city staffing, or is it on the other side, the expression of compassion for the ratepayers? So which of those is it? How does that figure into this decision not to pursue those plans?
Would you like Anna Marie to talk
I
about
just want to
that?
make a sort of a comment that the municipal solicitor in a couple of different districts, so generally, who files liens for sewer and water and everything all the time. I file more than 35 liens a year on communities that are 1/10% of the city, maybe even 1/20 the size of the city. So when I looked at those numbers, just as a practitioner, I thought, well, that can't be right. I mean, I really just thought that was dramatically too small. And then, you know, the lawyer kicks in on the bankruptcy court claims, well, there's another way to do that, you know, there are things. But I just, as a lawyer looking at this, I just don't think that's a lot. And I don't know if it's that the law bureau is overwhelmed. I get that. I've seen the city law bureau. I've worked with the city law bureau. Or if it's just that's, you know, that's sort of the way they want to handle it, but it's not a lot of volume. I mean, I don't know what That's experiences, but in my experience, that's just not very much.
Well, and the other thing that I saw, I mean, that's great to follow up on the truly delinquent. When Mark talked to us, he had done several pilot initiatives where he followed up and said, by the way, you're six or whatever, and it's not just the standard bill. And he had an amazing, like a 50% collection rate. So I think the more you can get before you have to take the legal route, and it takes, I think, so little effort, as he showed when he had that pilot project, and it was my understanding that was what they were going to build on, and that's why they felt confident to say we could go up to 93% at some point.
Like a lien, it's stupidly simple. I mean, it's not, I
Yeah,
would not call it a legal,
okay,
that's an aggrandizement of what it is.
okay.
But what it does do is gets everybody's attention and it protects the city's position. That's really what we're doing.
So just maybe a little more definition on what they're trying to do and encouraging them that it's a priority that they should focus on. And I think the main thing, Jeffrey, I know sometimes we're trying to roll the ball up the hill, but I think we still need to keep knocking it. We still need to keep making the point so that, you know, either the current administration or the next administration knows that it's something that we need to focus on.
Well, to that end, I mean, obviously, the board in the Act, in Act 124, there is specific language, and I know Anna Marie looked at it, that talks about what to do if the city has failed to follow their own plan, their own 5-year plan. The board can communicate at the very least back to the city and say, either you haven't provided us enough explanation, as Doug said, or we find this out of keeping with the plan, and therefore it's throwing the numbers off, or we need more information from the city on this subject or any other subject from Mr. Woolley's correspondence about what's going on with the finances. So that's totally at the discretion of the board if you want to send correspondence back to the city.
I would also like to just take advantage as well of your relationship with Dan to try and communicate to Mark and Dan what we need to do. We can always follow that up as well with a
Happy to do
stronger
that.
statement.
I'm happy to try to do that. I have found that over the last month, we've communicated less, and I'm fearful that that is a trend as the year is starting to close, or maybe that they're busy
Right.
working on other things, but
Well, cooperation's our middle name, so
Yeah,
we need to give it the old college try.
and I will just add overtime to that. I really found the explanation of the overtime unsatisfactory entirely, aside from the way it was presented, in that we don't know as of what period the year-to-date was. We don't have the benefit of prior year numbers. And I, because of my initial interest in Philly and their ICA, I'm on their mailing list. And so according to Philly, they are 15% down in their overtime for this current year. And so when I look at the city saying almost every excuse for their overage was COVID, well, if we're dealing with COVID, so is Philly, and we're 12% over. And one of the first things that the Philly ICA did was really take a look at overtime, because you can imagine what kind of numbers it is in Philly relative to the numbers here. But it's not inconsequential. And I think it's something that we should continue to look at and get a better presentation of what those numbers are.
well, at the very least, I assume it's the pleasure of the board that Mr. Woolley, who was unable to come to this meeting, come to another meeting.
Yeah.
At the very least. So,
Any other?
So then under 210C, as I understand what everybody's saying, basically, I mean, the first determination is that this board has deemed the response to be inadequate in a variety of different ways that we can specify. And so that would be the response letter from the board back to the city.
Although first, we're gonna go the cooperation route.
We're gonna check.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll start with a check. And then move to an official communique if Jeff thinks that's required.
Ralph,
And
so,
then the way the provision is written, that gives the city another quarter to respond back. So, just so everybody understands.
and that's, I think, where Jeffrey was trying to say, that's when the next one's due.
Right.
But Ralph, you were,
Yeah, I was just gonna to pick up from where Anne Marie has it, and if you entertain motion, I'd be happy to do so. And the motion will be that we communicate a finding that there's been a variation from the approved budget financial plan in the area of improving the collections rate in the neighborhood services fund. And to make that, what that would imply was that if this motion were to be approved, that would be communicated to the city, and then under the act, it would allow the city the opportunity to rectify it, communicate additional information, and it would also open up opportunity for the authority to communicate recommendations, such as from professional staff who might have some relevant experience and recommendations to help assist with speeding up this very important initiative. So long version of it can be potentially a short motion, which is to make that determination that there's been a variation in the financial plan regarding the collections rate.
Brett, if I could ask you to make a modification, amend that slightly, because there are actually three things. Your particular concern is that the neighborhood services collection rate fund. But Kathy initially mentioned the staffing or manning, let's call it, of the OPEB trust. And Audrey's concern is the overtime. So that if the response from this board would go back to the authority, to the city, it should specifically address at least what was said here, those three issues. Not only your concern about the neighborhood services.
Sure. So I'm happy to withdraw that and make an amended motion. But if in doing that, if I could ask for some clarification on what is the variation on the overtime projections that we would be finding? I'm unclear on that. If it's more a matter of management communications, that we could potentially address that without making a determination on variations in the plan. Really, the OPEB trust is supposed to have been created for a couple plans in a row now.
Yeah.
So I think that's and staff, yeah. So I think that would be appropriate as far as variation goes, is why it's not quite done yet. But
so, and I'm catching up here. So we've just moved away from cooperation to an actual letter, which is your motion. And I'm happy to entertain it.
We can make the letter.
same thing, yeah, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. We can make it conditional upon failure in cooperation.
Yeah, it's not
Okay.
it's not meant to be an adversarial one, but it is the process that's outlined in Act 124. So
To communicate the determination of the.
Yeah, because I'm just clarifying, because at one point we've gone to just Jeffrey's going to talk to them, and then we'll follow up to, we're going to write an official letter regarding the OPEB trust and the NSF
Can we
to
do
the
that?
city.
If the cooperation initially fails, then we
Okay.
want to go to a letter. And frankly, I would like to see something mentioned, and I understand your point, Ralph, that the overtime doesn't fit quite within the plan. But the overtime that the chairwoman has talked about, and also out of this letter, what I found really troublesome was the reference to the implementation of the American Rescue Plan Act, which wasn't contemplated in the plan because we didn't know, what did you call it, that we would have $5. I like that, yeah, at that point in time, so it couldn't be in the plan. But that's also a concern because my understanding, subject to Jeffrey correcting me, is that some of this money has to be at least tagged this year if we're going to get it.
No, we don't have to,
No.
no, you don't have to
Not at all.
expend any of it.
No,
No tagging at all till next
No.
year.
Till next year. Okay, well, next year will be frittering away very quickly, you know, as.
Well, I think we have,
as-
we have an agenda item. I don't want to mix apples and oranges.
Yeah.
We do have an agenda item to talk about ARPA. So if we can separate the thoughts on ARPA, which are very good, from the thoughts about the non-compliance with the 5-year plan, which we have a motion from Mr. Barton on the floor,
oh, sorry, I should have asked.
which
for
we
a
need to
second.
clarify what it is, and we need a second
Well,
for
we're
it.
still trying to hammer out exactly.
What the motion
What the
is.
motion is. And my understanding is there were 3 subjects. 2 were clearly a variation from the 5-year plan. One is sort of maybe a variation from the 5-year plan, although that's the overtime. It's sort of less.
That was very tricky.
Tricky to
When you
say it's
look
a
at the overtime
variation.
plan, It's very tricky to draw a
Right.
equal sign.
Right. And then the thought was that you empower the authority manager to communicate the displeasure with these items. And then if there's no relief coming from your displeasure, that you then proceed to an official declaration of variation, which would start a timetable with needs to be corrected. I'm okay with however you want to authorize it. I was okay with the chair's suggestion that we sort of leave it amorphous for, let's say, 1 cycle and see if I can make any progress, sort of give the city a chance, and then do some sort of official thing at your next meeting, which will be here before you know it, or you could do it official at this meeting and still leave it up to me to communicate in whatever way I feel is best. It's whatever the board feels is the best way to approach this.
So we have your motion on the floor. Is there a way to amend it so that it stands and allows, if Jeffrey gets no feedback or no conversation going, that your motion empowers Jeffrey to work with us to get communication to the mayor ASAP?
Yeah, we can proceed in a number of ways for sure. My suggestion would be obviously to go the motion route and to send the determination as been a variation. I did that just before the meeting. I was looking at Act 124, and that's my reason for wanting to suggest we take that route. But it lays out a process in which we communicate to the city, which we've done already, which is the submission of questions, receiving reports, and conducting investigations into the performance of the financial performance of the city throughout the course of the year. And we've done that. We've had a response here, and the response was that the initiative was not implemented. So I believe this is really just you could think of it almost like a mile marker in which we would note, we make a finding saying that we determined there's been a variation from the plan. And as a result, it triggers another round of communications with the city that says, we'd like from you, and there's Anna Marie can do it better than my paraphrase, I'm sure, but it would trigger communications from the city, and it would either lead to bringing it to compliance with the plan or bringing the plan to change to meet the results, one way or the other. But right now it's kind of neither, and we kind of want it to be one or the other. It's ultimately the city's job to either implement the plan or amend it, not our job. But as far as monitoring it, I think, in my opinion, there's been a significant variation that attention should be called to that, and we should proceed that way. That's my opinion. So that's why I'd be happy to make that motion.
Okay. So do you have the motion?
Yeah, I mean, we recorded, I think I understand the essence of the motion, what
Okay.
to do, but this would be an official determination of the board that there's a variation.
Exactly, just a
It's
variation.
an official, right, it's an official, it's a determination.
And then is it just on that one piece relative to the reviews along all 3?
So,
Because I think that there's a degree of difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, from my brothers, I think the important one, the NSF, I think that's the one where clearly I think they stated that they decided not to pursue that effort, and therefore not improve the collection rate with this problem. On the OPEB, there's still 3 months left in the year, so because there's no timeline there, I'm not sure if there was a variation or not, although I'm more than happy if someone else in the board, such as Kathy, has a feeling about it different than mine, that somehow the variation from the plan. When I glanced at that section of Act 124, it referred to financial variation. So that's why, in preparing for this meeting, my thinking was that we really want to communicate that formal communication would be with respect to financial variation. So I'm sorry to be wishy-washy about it. It's, I agree wholeheartedly with Kathy that the establishment of the trust should be accomplished with urgency. Whether this is the format for that, I would probably prefer, because I didn't study that in advance. I wasn't prepared to.
So the motion is just one.
Right, so in that being the case, I agree with you on the neighborhood fund. That it has reached a point where, as we talk about framing the city, you're not in compliance with the plan, are you going to come into compliance, or do we need to change the plan? That discussion, and that I think it fits within that.
Exactly.
So is that
On
is
the
that a
other
second
two.
just to move it forward?
So I'll second on
Okay.
that point, and then just a matter of discussion on the other two issues. I think we still need to ask for additional information from the city, so we have a sense of, are you proceeding with the OPEB trust, and you're going to be able to meet it within this plan year. And then on the other, I think it's a matter of, do we have the comparative information for us to be able to make a judgment,
Right.
whether there's an issue there with the overtime.
And Doug, I would be comfortable with that. I mean, you pointed out the difficulty that they are anticipating in finding members. And frankly, that's the first time I've seen or heard anything related to that. I mean, this open trust has been coming up and coming up and coming up. It's like there's a new hurdle that's just discussed. So if you should say something about that, separately, I'll defer to the point that the Neighborhood Services Fund is the clearest of the three concerns for purposes of variation of the plan.
So we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So, Jeffrey,
That's the second and related motion would be to authorize Jeffrey, the authority manager, to research recommendations. The act provides that we can give recommendations to the city. And I do think that, I mean, very much in particular from Doug to Jeffrey to Anna Marie, there's some folks with like really, can I say world-class expertise in these municipal financial management topics. I think it would be behoove us to volunteer their services and provide those recommendations to the city. And if that's the pleasure of the board, I'd love to make that motion to authorize Jeffrey to prepare some recommendations and forward those along.
And I'll second that.
discussion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
That's all. Thank you.
Great. All right, so now we're on to the topic that's related to what Kathy brought up, which is talking about the American Rescue Plan money and the city's efforts in that regard. And as we all know, we've been asking to be informed of the planning since we learned of this money early this year. I would like to read to you or quote to you Westburn Majors, city councilman from a meeting last night, where he says, and this is all relative to the lack of planning that's taking place, soliciting insight. He says, I'm passionate about this because it is something that is a game changer for our community, and our community needs to be involved in the process. So far, we've heard nothing. The National League of Cities says on its page, as cities contemplate how to utilize this unprecedented allocation of direct federal funds for all municipalities, it is critical that all community members be welcomed into the decision-making process. And we've not seen that. We have suggestions from the mayor on 2 topics that he wishes to use for funding. I did, just because I wanted to see what kind of input he is soliciting on the swimming pool. I went and walked through the survey. So the real feedback that is solicited is something like, do you want dumping buckets or spray park critters? Those are the sort of areas that they're getting into. There is one yes, no question about, is this an appropriate use of public funds? There is no room for comment. So there's nowhere for the public to either say, this is not something we want something else, or for the public to say, we haven't been asked, can we talk? So from my personal opinion, there just is absolutely no involvement of the community in discussions of how we're going to use that. And that goes contrary to National League of Cities. Certainly council wants to be involved. So I think we need to talk about how we communicate that as quickly as possible to the mayor, so that, again, we don't get into a position of being in next year and having to quickly designate. And it will help whoever's elected if we get conversations going. So sorry, that was my other thoughts.
I agree with you on that in particular, because there are a broad array of unmet needs, a broad array of issues, services that were exacerbated by COVID and other related economic circumstances, well beyond support for our seniors and support for our swimming pools. There are plenty of active community groups and individuals who would be happy to share those ideas, I'm certain. Similarly, the point of the funding and for the quick federal turnaround and moving the funding out was to inject it in the community, begin that some level of recovery, and to keep pushing off and pushing off and pushing off, to me defines that purpose.
Other thoughts?
I guess I have a follow-on question. Can we, as the board, make a recommendation of how we think the money should be spent?
I would probably hesitate. I think we could make a strong recommendation that you need a process to figure out what those funding priorities could be. But I think it would be with outside our purview to say we think it should be used for broadband or whatever. Because again, I think part of what we're seeing is not being done is they're not asking the citizens. So, and we're all citizens, so we should all have a chance as individuals to be able to voice those priorities. Now, that's just I don't.
And I would personally disagree with Audrey on that, knowing she's coming from a good place. And, you know, I also have thoughts about it, but I see absolutely no reason why we should not say, at least get this process started. You know, let's get this party started, folks. This is unprecedented in terms of the amount of money and the help it could bring to any municipality that's getting this money, but especially a place like Harrisburg. And to sit on it when we could be using it and potentially drawing down money, I think is more than a shame.
I have become quite knowledgeable about the interim rule from the U.S. Department of Treasury, and they make it extremely clear that there needs to be a community process in the designation of the projects, the determination of what's the efficient and effective use of the money. So it's much more than does a project qualify or not qualify. That's arguably that the things that the administration has talked about do qualify under one set of rules or another. The question really is, and other things would potentially qualify, other projects would potentially qualify. I think the point that the chair is making is very valid, and I think that the city could actually run afoul of the guidelines, and that's where there is some concern, because there have been other cities. I mean, this money is spread across the United States, and there are examples, and you can Google it, where cities have moved too fast to make determinations without a public process. And there's really some concern whether or not that they will run into some trouble in the reporting, and that they're you know, this is all very new. And the rule that we're all following is still the interim rule. It's not even the final rule, though it should be final before the end of the year. And it's clear that, that there has to be, even currently, there's a lot of language about public participation and process. And then if you know anything about other federal grant programs, that's a very common component in using federal money that they're, and of course, some communities do a better job of engaging their citizens than others, but you really, it's much more than a survey monkey survey. I mean, engagement is a thing unto itself. And what I had said, Kathy, is that I don't want to presuppose what the citizens of Harrisburg may or may not think is the appropriate use of the money.
And again,
I have a lot of opinions,
Yeah.
and some of my opinions might be smart because I'm in the field, but I still think the whole point here isn't whether or not those are good projects. I'm not even willing to say that the mayor's ideas are not necessarily the projects that the city of Harrisburg citizens would support. They might be. But I think regardless, you have to have this public participation in the process. And that does take time and energy and resources. And the sooner you start that, the quicker you'll get to actually start putting money on the street, whether it be for the pools or for storm sewer or for any of the other possible things
and
that you could
that's-
use the money for.
That's exactly why I'm very comfortable at least saying that we should get the party started.
Get the party started. Well, I mean, I think if you were to ask the administration, and I would never speak for them, they would say that they have started the party, but I think if you were to ask the city council, you would say that they haven't been invited, and that's pretty important. And neither, I'm not sure, of the citizens of the city.
I don't think we started the party by saying, what about these two ideas?
Yeah.
The party is, what are your ideas? Let's bring them in. Let's find a way to get them on the table and sort through them.
Sure.
What makes the most sense for the resources available.
It is a once in a lifetime opportunity. This money will never happen again. Probably.
Yeah. I
And
was just
so,
gonna say, never-
let's assume
never
that
say
it
never.
won't. And it is a tremendous amount of money. There are rules. But as the year has progressed, we found that within the rules, there's lots of wiggle room, as there often is in federal programs. You can do a lot of different things with the money. The city of Harrisburg has no shortage of needs. One of the problems, to tie this all to our first conversation with the controller's office, is that if we had some sort of strategic plan, some sort of capital plan, we had some plan on the shelf that everybody had already had years of input, you take that plan off the shelf and you say, well, look, we could do all these 6 things, these priorities, but we don't have that in the city of Harrisburg, so we have to start developing that.
I'm gonna
Now.
wrap this up because Kathy wants to get this party started. And now, in the spirit of the season, we're looking for the elf on the shelf. But, so I'd like to ask for a motion from someone to allow me, perhaps in concert with Doug, to get a letter to the mayor ASAP expressing our frustration
So
and encouragement to get the party started.
Second.
Discussion? You guys need to- All those in favor say aye.
uh,
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Jeffrey,
Yes.
authority business. You've got a report on bills paid and a proposed 2022 meeting schedule.
We'll start with the schedule, because I think that was the first bullet in no particular order. You should have received in your packet the proposed schedule. I'm sure it's fine with everyone in the room, and I'm sure you've looked at it, but if we could just have a motion, second, and approval that this be the official schedule, that would be great.
Essentially, it follows the same.
Same
guideline.
pattern we goes.
Second,
so
all those in favor?
Mr. Hill.
Aye.
Okay.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, great. And the second thing is just the standard bills paid report. The good news is thank you once again to the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. As we did get our allocation, much appreciated, and our representatives are in the room today. As you see at the top of the page, so our balance started with a meager $79,628.18, but we finished the period with a healthy balance of $174,025.27. So we're in business for our current fiscal year, and we should have enough proceeds to continue our important work for the city.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Jeffrey in that regard? We're now moving to public comments, and I will let you solicit those.
Well, there's nobody on Zoom, so I think we have Mr. Grover in the audience, so.
I would like to just point two pieces of information out. One on our, on the October 12th, council approved an allocation for legal technical services compliance requirement proposals. The interim so right now it's looking towards the budget areas and vice council and mayor. And we're familiar in my office, some of them have very little strings attached, some of them have many strings attached. And just strategically think about it. Maybe that Charlie's number for 5 million. There's a very generous formula. Take it out 3 different years in a row. So the number is going to come. Treasury Department has the initials, but like other government things, it's not very compatible. Literally, the only thing screenshot, it couldn't actually print out the document or get an email, any of that. The only thing screenshot of their system, but they're building out their. And so that's what we had in it, provided with the calculation list there. Two on the budget, just so you're aware, you may be able to just so. January of next year, regardless of what the budget happens in November, December, with changeover, whether it's a new mayor or new council, both, they have the right in January to reopen the budget, and then they have to that is plainly going to affect 5-year plan. I just caution you that there's going to be a lot of moving parts, and if there's different policies, different priorities, that it won't comply with 5-year plan. That's what people like. So, you have 2 new council members coming on board. They have different mayor, maybe not. Whichever way it is, it's going to be a process. So I'm just giving you that, but it sort of doesn't fit the action 24 timetable, but the act. So I'm still, that's there, and that'll all be public stuff, but it will be quick. It's a very quick period of time to put together a budget, pass a budget, reopen the budget, start over again, and at least twice in Harrisburg's history in the last 10 years, that process failed. And what happens is you're stuck with the budget you already approved last time. So that's what happens. So there's a lot, it's a very intense process. But I'm just letting that is there. So there's a lot of parts for December, January.
Thank you.
Does anybody else?
All right,
Mr. Bindle, do you have any questions today?
okay, in that case, I'd like to adjourn this meeting into executive session for purposes of litigation discussion.
That's
Yeah.
good.
So.
So everybody else, we'll take a break and everybody else will depart and we'll turn off the recording. So thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for that clarification, Neil.
Madam Chairman, do you expect any votes